They tried to burn the journal. Twice. The fire wouldn't take. Its leather cover cracked and smoked, but the pages inside stayed cold, untouched, like they didn't belong to this world. That's when the whispers began again, after 150 years of silence. Whispers about a child who calculated death, mapped human behavior like a machine, and vanished into myth. But make no mistake, Emma Richter was real. And what she uncovered in 1873 Milwaukee wasn't madness. It was pattern, forbidden pattern, the kind that makes governments erase names, that makes priests sweat in their collars, that makes men disappear. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because this story didn't die in Milwaukee. It metastasized. Her name was Emma Richter. Born 3 weeks premature on a storm-torn immigrant ship from Bavaria, a baby so fragile the crew had already carved her name for the death ledger. But she didn't die. She watched, and she remembered, as if she was born not to live, but to observe. From the age of 4, she could recite every word from conversations she'd only heard once. At 6, she could name the day of the week for any date in recorded history. At 10, she began predicting things, terrible things, and they always came true. People dismissed it as coincidence at first, but coincidences don't kill 3 men, destroy a marriage, and set fire to an entire block. Not in the same month, not when an 11-year-old girl writes it all down before it happens, with the time, the place, and the names. This is not a ghost story. It's worse. Because Emma didn't claim to hear spirits. She didn't speak in tongues. She simply watched and calculated. And when she spoke, people died. In her final days before vanishing, she filled a journal with columns of numbers and cryptic symbols, including a phrase repeated 33 times. The pattern is the punishment. Most of the people who tried to decode that journal ended up either dead or institutionalized. The ones who survived, they never spoke of it again. Tonight we begin uncovering what they buried. Not just the story of a strange child, but the story of a system, a design, a set of human behaviors so predictable, so manipulable, that if you understood them, you could control anyone. And Emma did. She didn't predict the future. She saw the program. You said, the German Quarter of Milwaukee in 1873 was more than just cobblestone and chimney smoke. It was a laboratory of repetition, men walking the same paths to the same breweries, women hanging laundry in patterns they didn't realize they were following. To most, it was ordinary life. But to Emma Richter, it was data, variables, a living system quietly begging to be decoded. She sat in her kitchen window each day, silent and small, with those pale grey eyes that never seemed to blink, and she watched. She counted the steps Herr Kruger took to work. 247 on Mondays, but 284 on Wednesdays. She tracked when Mrs. Fisher changed her laundry sequence and when Mr. Weber looked over his shoulder twice instead of once. She measured the delay between the brewery whistle and the arrival of the first worker at the tavern door, and in those numbers Emma saw cracks, deviations, warnings. When she first told her parents that Mr. Dietrich would die at exactly 2:14 in the afternoon, they punished her, scolded her for saying such things. But when he did, falling dead in the malt room, heart ruptured like overworked machinery, her father didn't punish her again. He locked the door and began to fear her. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because wherever you are, someone like Emma may already be watching you. Maybe not a child, maybe not someone with a journal, but someone who knows how to read the system behind your choices. The truth is, you don't have free will. You have probabilities. Predictable sequences of behavior that you mistake for decisions. Emma wasn't supernatural. She was observant. She was what happens when someone removes emotion and sees the world as it truly is. A repeating set of events, patterns and deviations. And when she told her mother that Mr. Zimmerman would die in a fire, at 8:47 p.m. no less, it wasn't because she had a vision. It was because she'd seen the soot pattern change in the chimney draft, measured the angle of smoke over time, tracked the household's fuel purchases, and calculated the moment when tension and combustion would align. What kind of child does that? What kind of mind wants to? When the fire came and Zimmerman died just as she said, the community stopped calling Emma gifted. They started calling her something else. An instrument. Not of God, not of science, but of something older. Emma's desk was never cluttered with dolls or ribbons. It was a battlefield of ink and calculation. Her leather-bound journal, smaller than a Bible but heavier than guilt, was always within reach. Page after page of dates, measurements, step counts, equations, even rainfall variations cross-referenced with human behavior. By 11 years old, she had already mapped out the daily activities of nearly every resident in the German quarter. Not just what they did, but why they did it. When they paused too long at the corner bakery, when their pace quickened walking past the rectory, when a smile didn't match the pattern of previous weeks. She was cataloguing deviation. And in those deviations, Emma saw collapse coming, like a seismograph that could detect not just earthquakes but betrayal. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because someone needs to see this story, and maybe it's you. Maybe this is the moment you realize you've been living inside a system you never questioned. Let me tell you what really turned the neighborhood against Emma. It wasn't the deaths, not even the fire. It was the Weber incident. On a cold morning in March, Emma looked up from her journal at breakfast and said with chilling calm, "Mrs. Weber will be discovered tomorrow, 11 a.m., office of the brewery. Her husband will arrive 47 minutes early due to his horse's developing lameness." Her mother dropped the knife. Her father's mouth opened, then closed again. Because Emma wasn't guessing. She had tracked the horse's gait deterioration for 11 days. She had counted the exact time shifts of Mrs. Weber's visits to the brewery and cross-referenced it with Mr. Kellner's late departures. She had predicted, not suspected, not assumed, but calculated, the convergence point, the exact moment their affair would erupt into violence. And it did. "Just as Sir," he said. Blood, broken bones, screams echoing off brick. But the real damage wasn't to bodies, it was to the illusion of secrecy. Because what terrified the community wasn't just that Emma knew, it was that she had always known. Quiet. Watching, logging their sins in real time. The German quarter turned. The priest who once called her a divine gift now whispered about the devil's arithmetic. Neighbors crossed streets. Children stopped playing. Emma didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just kept writing. Because by then, she wasn't tracking the neighborhood anymore. She was tracking them. There's a kind of silence that doesn't just hush the air, it compresses it. Makes every sound that follows feel like a crime. That's what fell over the Richter household after the Weber incident. No more visitors, no more letters. Even the church stopped knocking. But Emma didn't seem to notice. She had begun work on something far more ambitious than human schedules. She had turned her mind toward the structures, the design of Milwaukee itself, the grid, the layout, the angles at which streets intersected, the shadows cast by buildings at different times of day. She measured them, plotted them, and then overlaid her calculations with the movements of people. It wasn't madness, it was precision. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because if Emma's right, even your city isn't random. It's engineered for outcomes you never chose. One afternoon, her father found a new set of sketches in her room. At first glance, they looked like maps, but they weren't. They were diagrams of the city's intersections, layered with strange symbols, triangles, spirals, planetary glyphs from old alchemy texts, and equations that stretched beyond what anyone in town could understand. Her geometry spiraled outward, intersecting with time cycles, lunar phases, and something terrifying: birth dates. She had assigned numerical values to every person she tracked and created predictive charts. not of behavior, but of destiny. As if people weren't just patterns, they were outcomes waiting to unfold. Her father confronted her, but Emma didn't argue. She simply said, "If the city is a machine, then people are its gears. The machine is broken." The next morning, the church bell rang 32 times. An error, they said. But Emma had predicted it. She had written 32 tolls, July 3rd, ignition point in her journal a week earlier. What followed wasn't furor, it was madness. People began reporting the same nightmare, a tall figure with no face, standing at a street corner, mouthless but whispering, always at intersections Emma had marked, always just after the 30-second chime. Those who dreamt it woke changed, silent, withdrawn, pacing like rats in a maze. Emma never dreamed it. She only documented the spread. And in her eyes, there was no fear, only confirmation. The machine had started turning, and she was no longer just a part of it. She was its engineer. "You said?" The whispers started in the schoolhouse. Not from students. Emma hadn't been allowed to attend since the Weber affair, but from the teachers. They spoke in tight circles behind shut doors, always glancing over their shoulders. One claimed Emma had written a full Latin passage backward, perfectly mirrored with grammar intact. Another swore she saw Emma sketching with both hands simultaneously, different diagrams, neither needing correction. But it was what she said during a thunderstorm that finally reached the mayor's ears. As lightning cracked across the Milwaukee sky, Emma stood at the window, scribbling rapidly. When her father asked what she was doing, she replied calmly, "Mapping the rhythm of divine interruption." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because sometimes genius doesn't illuminate the world. Sometimes it burns right through it. What no one knew was this: Emma had begun corresponding with someone. No postmark, no address, just folded letters left in the hollow of the old elm tree at the edge of Grover's Field. Each one was written in a cipher that no one could break. Her father once tried, kept him up 3 nights straight. The symbols looked familiar, Greek, Arabic, even Old Norse runes, but the structure was alien. The syntax curved back on itself, recursive and shifting, but Emma read them fluently and responded. She called the author the one who watches the lattice, whatever that meant. In one letter, later found under a floorboard, she wrote, "The design is correct. The fulcrum lies beneath the city. The numbers scream at the corner of Ludlow and 9th. I await your signal." Days later, a man was found standing precisely at that intersection. Naked, bleeding from the eyes, whispering in a tongue no one could identify. He died before morning. Emma noted the time of death in her journal with its one word beside it: alignment. Her parents were beyond panic now. They'd stopped trying to stop her. Her mother spent most days weeping into a rosary. Her father, once proud and stoic, stared at nothing for hours, like something had snapped quietly inside. Emma barely noticed. Her journal now had names marked not in ink, but in ashes. People who hadn't died yet, but would. Dates beside them, locations, cause. The list was growing. And the terrifying part? So far, she hadn't been wrong once. "You said." On the morning of August 11th, 1873, Reverend Milan Pierce, an old firebrand preacher known for hellfire sermons and a strict moral code, walked straight into the Richter home without knocking. He was pale, trembling, and for the first time in his long career, afraid to speak. He had come from the asylum. A former student of his, one Elias Brandt, had been admitted the night before, raving about a girl who draws time like a wire through the skull of the city. He wouldn't stop scratching his tongue, saying it had numbers on it now, and kept repeating a phrase that chilled Pierce to the bone. "The girl knows the truth that broke Babel." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from. Because if what Emma Richter uncovered is real, your language, your streets, your mind are already part of something older than choice. Pierce confronted the Richters. He demanded to see the journal, to speak to Emma, to stop whatever mathematical witchery she had unleashed. Emma appeared calmly from the hallway, holding a page torn from her journal. She handed it to Pierce and said, "You already saw it. You just forgot." Pierce looked down. It was a sketch of him, standing at the very spot in the Richter parlor, mouth slightly open, hand raised in accusation. Below it, written in tiny surgical handwriting, Section 6, the intercessor denies too late. His knees buckled, he whispered a prayer, then stumbled out into the street. That evening, he resigned from the church. 2 days later, he left town. But Emma kept writing. She began referring to her work not as calculations or maps, but as translations, as if she wasn't inventing something, but revealing what had always been there, beneath the surface. She spoke of a structure behind history, a lattice made not of wood or stone, but of choice, timing, and error. Emma believed that certi and intersections in the city, both physical and temporal, weren't accidents. They were pressure points, nodes, places where reality had thinned, allowing the true nature of the system to peek through. She had started to visit them. At night, alone. Neighbors began spotting her standing in the middle of cobbled roads, eyes closed, arms raised to the sky like a diviner reading the stars. Always at odd times, 2:03, 4:44, 1:11. Times that didn't feel real, times that felt choreographed. By September, the city began to hum with something unnatural. Street lamps flickered in perfect sync along entire boulevards. Dogs refused to cross certain streets. And at least 4 people had vanished, without evidence, without reason, each from a site Emma had marked months earlier. But still she wrote, still she mapped, because she believed she was close to the truth buried not in books or churches, but beneath the floorboards of reality itself. You said, Milwaukee's first official frost came early that year, October the 3rd, 1873, but it wasn't the bite of winter that shook the city. It was the sound. At exactly 3:17 a.m., residents from the river to the 12th ward were jolted awake by a low, mechanical groan, like metal being pulled through stone. It lasted 11 seconds. Windows rattled, horses reared, infants screamed, and then silence. Deafening, total silence. Except one home. The Richter house. Inside, Emma stood barefoot in the hallway facing the grandfather clock. It wasn't ticking. She wasn't surprised. She turned to her mother, who had collapsed in prayer on the staircase, and whispered, "The machine has started, but it's missing a gear. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because if Emma Richter was right, this world runs on more than time. It runs on precision, and someone, something, is checking the calibration." That morning, a local tinsmith named Gerald Weller was found dead beside his lathe. His blood had crystallized. Not congealed, crystallized. His body temperature was recorded at 17 degrees Fahrenheit, despite it being over 40 outside. Emma had drawn him the week before, a sketch labeled, "First Collapse, Component Rejected." Authorities tried to intervene. Dr. Willoughby, who'd once dismissed Emma as delicate-minded, petitioned the city to have her committed, but when his petition was reviewed, something odd was discovered. His signature had been forged, by himself. The handwriting matched, the ink was fresh, but Willoughby had no memory of writing it. He swore under oath that he never signed any such document. Emma's journal entry for that day: "The system self-corrects. Unauthorized delays will be overwritten." Soon whispers spread beyond Milwaukee. Men from Chicago and St. Paul arrived, men in black coats who asked no questions but offered large sums for any of Emma's writings. One man was seen burning pages in an alley behind St. Catherine's Church. He was weeping. Another was found days later at the bottom of the Kinnickinnick River, rocks sewn into his coat lining. The townspeople began to fracture. Some believed Emma was possessed. Others called her a prophet. Most just stayed indoors and avoided eye contact with the Richter house altogether. But the city's alignment was changing. Emma's calculations had moved from notebooks to the walls themselves. Her room became a monument of chalk, ink, ash, and blood, symbols layered over one another like overlapping blueprints of a building no one else could see. She claimed the final sequence was close, that soon the eye behind time would open, and she needed to be at the center when it did. Because if she wasn't, the design would collapse, and it would take the city with it. The warning stopped being metaphors. Emma Richter's drawings, once obscure diagrams and occult geometry, turned into maps. Streets, sewer lines, property deeds from before the fire of '62. And always a black circle somewhere on the page labeled with one word: entry. She began refusing food, not out of protest or illness. She said digestion disrupted her inner harmonic. Instead, she consumed only water, crushed fennel seeds, and, on 3 separate occasions, something no one could identify, scraped from beneath the floorboards. Her voice changed too, not in pitch, but in origin. When she spoke, it no longer came from her chest or throat. Witnesses claimed it sounded like it entered the room from somewhere above her and only passed through her body. Her father recorded one conversation in a final letter to the mayor before he vanished. She asked if I could still hear the ticks between the seconds. I told her time doesn't work that way. She smiled and said, "Exactly." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because when time no longer moves forward, what exactly is watching you from behind? Then came the blood rain. For 6 minutes on October 18th, droplets fell across 4 blocks in the 3rd ward, thick, dark, unmistakably organic. Scientists were called. They took samples, but by morning, the vials were empty, every single one. Not spilled, not evaporated, gone. Emma's journal read, "The offering was accepted. Calibration continues." People began to leave the city, quietly. Entire households gone overnight, horses left tethered, lamps still burning, food still warm. And in the center of it all, Emma stood alone in Grover's Field, digging. Authorities arrived to stop her, but she didn't resist. She simply handed them a folded page from her journal and said, "You're late." The paper read, "To arrive on time. Me is to misunderstand the clock." Inside the hole, buried 6 feet down, they found a wooden box, roughly the size of a child's coffin. No hinges, no nails, just sealed with thick waxy resin. Inside, a single object, a gear, large, bronze, impossibly complex. The teeth were etched with numbers too small to read by candlelight. Emma reached for it, but the sheriff pulled her back. He ordered it taken to the station. By dawn, the station had burned to the ground. The gear was never recovered. Emma didn't panic. She simply said, "The design always adapts," and she began drawing again, faster than ever. Because without the original gear, she would have to build another one. You said, October 22nd, 1873. Milwaukee awoke to find the street names gone. Not vandalized, gone. Every wooden signpost had been replaced with smooth metal plates etched in symbols no one could read. Curves, loops, fragments of geometry more suited to celestial charts than city corners. Mail deliveries ceased. Horses refused to walk certain streets. Even compasses spun erratically when near the 3rd ward. And in the center of it all, Emma was building. She had converted the basement of the Richter home into what neighbors called the humming room. From the outside, the noise was faint but constant, a low-frequency thrum that made your bones ache and your molars buzz. From inside, no one knew. No one wanted to know, except for a boy named Calvin Meyer, 11 years old, fascinated by Emma since the frost. He snuck into the house on October 24th, and he never came out. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because Calvin Meyer was just the first. And the machine Emma was building, it didn't run on coal or steam or electricity. It ran on absence. His mother found his coat on the Richter's banister the next morning. Inside the pocket was a note. "You must subtract something to make the gears turn." Emma didn't deny anything, When questioned, she simply pointed to the sky and said, "We subtract so the whole may function." He understood that. The mayor called for her arrest. The officers never made it inside. All three men, upon crossing the threshold, collapsed to the floor. Their mouths moved, but no sound came. When they finally stood, hours later, they had no memory of who they were, not even their own names. Emma called it resonance rejection. She said the house had attuned to the design, and anyone who entered with disharmony in their soul would be erased, piece by piece. The house had become a filter, and Emma was its conductor. Her new journal entries became unreadable, not just cryptic, literally unreadable, entire pages written in reverse polarity, ink that only appeared when near heat. Margins full of equations that referenced the speed of shadow and timefall curvature. One note simply read, "Chronotoxin detected, must isolate." That night, 5 homes on the block boarded their doors from the inside and set them ablaze. No screams. No escape. Just fire. By dawn, the Richter home stood alone on a blackened street. Unburned, untouched, perfectly preserved. And from its chimney rose not smoke, but steam, white, slow, rhythmically pulsing, as if the house itself had begun to breathe. You said, on the morning of October the 29th, the air smelled like iron. Not just near the Richter home, but across Milwaukee's 3rd Ward. Birds fell from the sky mid-flight. Dogs refused to leave their shelters. Clocks stopped at 3:33 a.m., then resumed in reverse for exactly 11 minutes before righting themselves. No one could explain it. But those who lived closest to Emma's house began whispering one word, awakening. They didn't mean spiritual, they meant mechanical. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because somewhere beneath that house the machine was waking up, and what it wanted had nothing to do with time. That same day, 3 priests arrived from Chicago, not appointed by any bishop, just sent. They claimed to be exorcists, not of demons, but of architectural possession. They carried no crosses, only blueprints. Blueprints Emma had never drawn, but which matched her basement exactly. She greeted them at the door with a smile. "You're late," she said, again. She offered them tea. They refused. One priest, Father Durney, descended into the basement alone. He was the only one who insisted he knew what this was, that he had seen it once before, in a monastery in Spain that no longer existed on any map. He lasted 12 minutes. When he came back up, he was laughing, not maniacally, joyfully. "I saw it turn," he whispered. "I saw the first revolution." His skin was pale, his pupils gone. They took him back to Chicago. He died en route. His body produced no heat, no decay. He remained unchanged for 17 days. The autopsy was inconclusive. Back in Milwaukee, Emma began wearing white gloves, not for modesty, but because her fingertips had darkened to a deep gray, like tarnished silver. She told the grocer her blood was no longer necessary for internal processes. She stopped blinking. She stopped sleeping. She wrote, "The flesh can't be trusted. The machine requires certainty." Then the dreams began. Hundreds of people reported waking up at exactly 2:46 a.m. Each had seen the same image. A single gear spinning slowly in a vast black void. No sound, no floor, just rotation. And standing behind it, motionless, a girl in white gloves. Emma. Only older. Much older. One witness, a former civil engineer, claimed the gear in the dream was not a component, but a key. When asked what it opened, he simply wept and said, "You don't open time, time opens you." By Halloween, children refused to trick-or-treat anywhere near Grover's Field. No one blamed them. The air buzzed, the sky throbbed, and beneath the earth, the hum deepened. You said, November 1st, 1873. The first sinkhole opened beneath the old granary. No storm, no warning, just the ground folding inward like cloth being tugged into a drain. Witnesses described it as silent collapse. No rumble, no cracking, just absence, like something had unstitched reality in a perfect circle 20 feet across. It wasn't mud, it wasn't rock. It was nothing. A black disk that swallowed light. City officials tried to fill it with sand, then gravel, then timber. Everything dropped straight through, gone. They covered it with iron sheeting and sealed the site. But 2 days later, 3 more appeared, one outside a church, one inside a schoolhouse basement, and the third inside the mayor's office. Right under his desk. He never returned to work. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because this wasn't erosion, this wasn't weather, this was Emma Richter's design expanding, a blueprint that had outgrown its drafter. She had stopped going outside altogether, but not out of fear. She no longer needed anything from the surface. People swore they saw faces in her windows, flickering inhuman shapes, like shadows that twitched independently of the light source. She was not alone in that house. One boy swore he saw a second Emma, not a twin, not a reflection, an older version, slightly taller, hair in braids, eyes glowing faintly blue, standing behind the younger Emma as she worked. He blinked, and she vanished. The boy developed seizures within a week. Doctors said it was epilepsy. But he kept drawing the same image, over and over, a spiral staircase going down. Each step labeled not with numbers, but with years. They started in 1873, and ended in 1841. Backward. His final drawing showed a doorway beneath the last step, carved above it, the chamber of inversion. That phrase would appear again, etched into walls, carved into tree bark, scratched into the floorboards of homes miles away. Always in the same handwriting, Emma's. Her diary now referred to version 3 of the sequence, and something she called Event Fold Point 0. She claimed she had stabilized the oscillation rate, that gravity now obeys design, and finally, one line, underlined 3 times. They will soon remember what they forgot to build. No one understood, but every scholar, physicist, and priest who read that line said the same thing. I've heard that before. And every single one of them forgot where. November 7th, 1873. The Richter home stopped casting a shadow. It was the mailman who noticed first. The house stood in full morning sun, but no outline stretched across the lawn, no slanting mark on the walkway, just light passing through it, as if the structure no longer accepted time's imprint. He never delivered mail again. A team of city surveyors arrived that afternoon. All 6 were instructed to take elevation readings, verify soil stability, and record magnetic anomalies. None of them brought compasses. Every device they did bring, altimeters, barometers, even pocket watches, ceased to function once they crossed the gate. One man vomited, one passed out. The youngest, a 19-year-old intern, screamed, "I can hear the shape of it!" They carried him out foaming at the mouth. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what was growing inside that house was no longer a machine. It was an environment. Emma had restructured space itself. Neighbors began moving away. Some packed overnight. Others left food on their porches with notes, in case the girl gets hungry. But Emma no longer consumed food. She wrote in her journal, "Calories are inefficient. I now run on recursivity." Her final known visitor was Dr. Calvin Wrench, a philosopher of science from Vienna. He arrived uninvited, claiming to have studied temporal logic collapses in secret military circles. He entered the house at 11:19 a.m. By 11:27 he came back out, his hair gone completely white. He refused to speak. For 3 days he sat in a boarding house muttering in broken German, "Sie hat die Zeit überzeugt. Sie hat die Zeit überzeugt." She convinced time. Then he cut out his own tongue. He bled to death that night. The coroner found something inside his jacket pocket, a torn page from an Austrian mathematics journal, but the ink wasn't printed. It was raised, like Braille, but with numbers. They formed a perfect loop, a formula that had no beginning, no end. Emma's writing was found on the back. "This is not math, it's a promise." And across town, church bells began ringing. Not on the hour, not together, but one after another, out of sequence, overlapping, as if arguing about what time it was. The Bishop of Milwaukee resigned the next morning. His farewell address simply said, "Time has been unchained. I refuse to shepherd men through a chronology I can no longer trust." That same day, the wind changed. For the first time in recorded history, Milwaukee's weather patterns reversed direction. North became south, and in Grover's Field, the birds that had once fallen from the sky began flying straight up. You said, November 12th, 1873. At exactly 3:03 a.m., all the clocks in Milwaukee stopped ticking. Watches, grandfather clocks, bell towers, every timepiece, private or public, froze at the same moment, down to the second. Even the prison clock, famously wound by hand twice a day, ceased in mid-chime. Time itself paused, but it only lasted 7 seconds, and when it resumed, things were wrong. The hands resumed movement, but not all in the same direction. Some clocks ticked backward. Others moved erratically, shifting between numbers that didn't belong, 13, 17, 21. Some began spinning continuously, and a few, the most ancient, began to melt. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what Emma Richter had built was no longer a machine. It was a language, and it was speaking back. Inside her home, strange lights pulsed from the basement windows, colors no human had a name for. Witnesses swore they heard chimes, flutes, and what sounded like children's voices reciting equations in reverse. 3 houses down, a baby was born with fully developed molars. He spoke Latin within an hour, then forgot how to breathe. At sunrise, a flock of crows circled the Richter house and froze mid-air, like marionettes held in stasis. When they finally dropped, their beaks were fused shut. Emma's diary that morning contained only one phrase, scratched violently into the paper over and over again. "We are the ancestors of our own invention." Elsewhere in the city, people began sleepwalking, but not in their homes. They were found walking toward the Richter house, by the dozens. Old men in nightshirts, children dragging blankets, entire families marching barefoot through the frost. Some held books, others held string, a few just wept. None of them remembered doing it. When city officials tried to barricade the neighborhood, their maps failed. The streets no longer aligned. What was once Jefferson Avenue now curled back on itself. Grover Lane became a spiral, and Briar Street had no end, just more Briar Street. Police attempted to evacuate the block. They returned with nosebleeds, speaking in numbers, drawing impossible shapes in the dirt. Emma's home stood untouched. Her windows were no longer reflective. They showed other scenes, deserts, oceans, other versions of the same house at different times of day, in different seasons, flickering in and out like shuffled memories. And from the chimney, music, low, harmonic tones, as if the house was tuning itself. The next morning, one final note appeared in Emma's journal, written in an older dialect. Ink faded. Once the 5th fold is reached, memory will become location, history will become hunger. She signed it, but not with her name. She signed it ERV6, version 6, which raised a new question. Where were versions 1 through 5? You said, 2 days later, Milwaukee's cathedral bell tolled once. Only once. No one had touched it. There was no wind, no ceremony, just a single hollow chime at 2:17 a.m. Everyone who heard it, across neighborhoods, churches, even ships at harbor, felt a deep vibration in their chest, like a memory they'd never lived was being pulled to the surface. That same night, Father Malachi Brennan, archivist of the St. Mary's Basilica, broke into the locked diocesan vault and tore out several 15th-century manuscripts. He fled the building barefoot and was later found at the Richter residence, kneeling on the frost-bitten lawn, reciting what witnesses described as a mathematical prayer. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because when men of faith start praying in numbers, the world as we know it has already begun to invert. One of the manuscripts Father Brennan had stolen was a heretical text never meant to be read again, Codex Prevaricatio, Latin for the Book of Deviation. It described something ancient, something recursive, an idea that could rewrite its own existence by living inside the minds of the living, transmitted not by speech or writing but pattern, and once recognized, it could no longer be unlearned. The manuscript had been sealed centuries earlier for one reason. It outlined how to build a conduit, not a portal, not a machine, a human. The necessary components matched Emma Richter precisely, a child born under a failed lunar eclipse. Bloodline touched by consanguinity and arithmetic obsession. Unmeasured IQ, and a perfect total disassociation from linear time. Emma wasn't just solving something. She was something. Her home, now surrounded by barbed wire and armed state agents, was silent on the outside, but neighbors still swore the windows glowed with pale blue geometry in the hours just before dawn. One man, a cartographer, reported that Emma's block no longer appeared correctly on city maps. He showed his findings to the city council. Street layouts had begun to warp digitally, even on printed materials. Satellite images looped. Some neighborhoods were now repeating. When the mayor attempted to deploy a team of topographical surveyors to the area, they returned after 2 hours, traumatized and mute, each missing 3 fingernails, with circular burn marks along their spines. None remembered what happened. That night, a new constellation appeared in the sky, just above Milwaukee, only visible within city limits. It matched the symbol on the first page of Emma's diary. 6-pointed, asymmetric, in motion. It wasn't a star map. It was a schematic. And no one knew what it built, or whether Emma had already finished it. You said, the city tried to quarantine her, not legally, structurally. At exactly midnight on November 11, 1873, Milwaukee officials, alongside military engineers from Fort Howard, erected a 9-foot steel perimeter around Emma Richter's home. No press, no announcement, no law on record. Locals woke to the sound of jackhammers and welding torches. By dawn, her street was gone, replaced by a corridor of welded plates, steam towers, and rotating guards who refused to speak. They called it Sector Zero, but the neighborhood called it The Breach. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because this wasn't lockdown. This was containment, and it wasn't meant to keep Emma in. It was meant to keep something out, or worse, something trying to get back in. Because that morning, 4 blocks away, at the home of physics professor Aldous Kent, an identical structure emerged, overnight. No construction, no crew, just appeared. He woke to find his entire home encased in seamless iron plating from the inside. He couldn't open his front door, couldn't touch his windows. The walls hummed, pulsed, and on every surface, ceilings, tables, mirrors, were copies of Emma Richter's diary pages, not handwritten, but etched into the grain of the materials themselves, burned into the molecules. They told no narrative, just formulas, sequences that looped into themselves, diagrams of impossible objects, a passage that read, What you see as space is compression. What you call time is unpacking. To remember is to inflate the past into a shape that can be survived. Kent tore the wall apart. Behind it, a second wall, identical. He smashed through that, and another, and another. 11 identical walls, 11 layers deep, each one humming louder than the last. On the final wall was a single phrase: "She is not in there, she is between." That night, the Richter house glowed red, not light, not flame, temperature. Observers from outside the steel perimeter reported waves of heat distorting the air, warping street signs, even blistering the paint off horse-drawn carriages. No one went closer than 50 feet. But inside, Emma was still writing. Her journal entries were now dated not with days, but with angles. The 17 degrees past core, D 23 degrees to event clock A. And always the same phrase repeated at the bottom of each page. The first loop fails because it forgets the observer. The second loop fails because the observer forgets itself. The third loop remembers too much. Emma wasn't lost. She was calculating how to collapse the loop. And every formula said the same thing. Milwaukee had already happened. This was just the third time through. You said they thought she was quiet now. After the steel encasement, after the journals turned to nothing but symbols, after the neighbors stopped seeing candlelight through the windows, they assumed, hoped, she had gone dormant. Maybe broken, maybe gone. But Emma Richter had simply shifted her signal. Because 3 blocks south in the basement of St. Helena's Church, the walls began to bleed. Not blood. Ink. Fine black script oozed from cracks in the stone, paragraphs in ancient Syriac and something else, something no language historian could place, began appearing overnight. By the time the bishop was called in, entire prayers had formed across the altar. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because when the foundations of your church start quoting a girl who hasn't been seen in weeks, you stop asking what's wrong with her, and start asking what's right about anything else. One phrase repeated over and over, etched into the pews, the crucifix, even inside the communion chalice. The veil is not a door. It is an equation. Solve it or be devoured by its remainder. The bishop ordered a full exorcism. It failed. Not because of spiritual resistance, but because the holy water evaporated before it touched the ground. The priest's Latin reversed itself mid-prayer, syllables bending backward in the air, choking the syllables as they left his mouth. That night, 3 nuns disappeared. Not fled. Disappeared. Their beds were still warm, their rosaries placed neatly on the sheets. But above each pillow, burned into the ceiling beams, the same impossible shape Emma had once drawn on the schoolhouse desk. A shape that made the eyes ache. That shifted if you stared too long. A shape geometry had no language for. The church was closed within hours, sealed with state orders marked unclassifiable incident. No further explanation. B. But those who had been inside whispered that the altar now hummed, not a sound but a pressure, like gravity had changed its mind about direction. Meanwhile, deep within the steel-encased Richter home, a noise began. Regular, patterned, like a metronome striking metal, once every 19 seconds. And on the 20th second, silence. A silence so total that it made grown men collapse, grasping at their ears, begging for the sound of anything, even screaming. But inside, Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, breathing in rhythm, whispering. We aren't alone in this equation. We were never the only variable. The others are waking up. You said it was the astronomers who noticed it first. A slight deviation in the stars over Milwaukee, not visible to the naked eye, but to the precise instruments at Marquette Observatory, the constellation Draco had moved by 0.0003 arc seconds. That should have been impossible. Stars don't just shift. Not without reason. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because when the heavens start bending and your city becomes the fulcrum, you're not in a scientific anomaly. You're in someone's experiment. The head astronomer, Dr. Lionel Finch, triple-checked the calculations. Then he checked the equipment. Then he checked himself into the infirmary after vomiting blood without warning. He died 2 days later, but not before scribbling his final note on the back of a star chart. They're using her as a lens. Space is folding, not upward, not outward. It's folding in. The city of Milwaukee began to tilt. Not physically, but perception twisted. Locals reported that street signs seemed to point toward places that didn't exist. Compass needles rotated slowly even when untouched. In the city morgue, 10 corpses, previously cold, registered a spike in cranial activity. Not revival, not life. Just one strange thing. They were dreaming. The medical examiner opened one skull. Inside the frontal lobe, folded, pressed, impossibly wedged between grey matter, was a slip of paper. 4 words. Invert the causal chain. That phrase began showing up everywhere, scrawled in subway tunnels, etched into mirror frost, and murmured by patients in the asylum who hadn't spoken in years. One nurse claimed she saw Emma Richter walk past her room at 3:13 a.m., not a hallucination. Emma made eye contact, smiled, and kept walking, except the hallway behind her didn't lead anywhere. It ended in a bricked wall. No exit, no entry, just brick. And on it, chalked in black ash. Your world was an afterthought. Back in the Richter house, neighbors now reported humming not just from the ground, but from the sky above the house. Birds flew in circles, confused. Dogs barked, then whimpered, then went silent. People stopped dreaming, but only around Emma's block. They didn't sleep better. They didn't sleep worse. They just closed their eyes and waited. And in that absence, Emma's whispers filled the gap. The stars were never lights. They were locks. And I was the key. By the 3rd week of July, Milwaukee was no longer on the same map. Not figuratively, literally. Weather satellites lost all tracking data above the city. Military drones dispatched to investigate vanished from radar 3 miles out, only to reappear spinning uncontrollably 5 miles east of where they'd been seconds before. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because when your hometown bends light, time, and topography, you're not in a city anymore. You're in a fracture. The Richter house, once a quiet Victorian home on Arbor Street, now loomed taller. No construction crews, no scaffolding. Yet by the naked eye, it had grown an additional floor. But only during certain hours. If you looked at it before dawn, it stood 3 stories high. Afternoon, 2. And by midnight, there was no house at all. Just a black silhouette against the sky where architecture used to be. Inside, the walls whispered. Not metaphorically, they whispered. One detective, sent to confirm if Emma Richter had indeed returned, lasted 11 minutes inside. He came out with blood trickling from his eyes, reciting coordinates that didn't exist on any map. 87.4 by -144.6, below the floorboards. Behind the silence. He was institutionalized that evening. The department quietly sealed the case, but the whispers spread. Across town, radios tuned to dead frequencies suddenly burst into static-laced recitations of Emma's childhood rhymes, but played in reverse, with an extra line never heard before. Ashes, ashes, fold the line, bring the dreamer back through time. A mathematics professor at the university connected the phrases in the journals Emma left behind and found something chilling. A topological construct, a multi-dimensional map embedded within her doodles, something that resembled a looped consciousness model theorized only in fringe films. 6. And in the center of the diagram, a tiny circle marked simply, me, no name, no coordinates, just that, me. The professor didn't return home that night. His wife found his office door locked from the inside, blackboards wiped clean, except for one phrase etched with chalk so deeply it cut into the slate. She's solving herself. When she finishes, the rest of us vanish. No one spoke of Emma at school anymore. Her desk remained untouched. A faint warmth radiated from its surface even weeks later. No teacher dared move it. And beneath the floorboards of the classroom came knocking, rhythmic, purposeful, not asking to come in, but asking to be let out. The knocking stopped on the 39th day. Not faded. Stopped. As if whatever was beneath the floor had found a way out. Or worse, no longer needed to knock. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because when the sounds beneath your feet go silent, that's not peace, that's preparation. City engineers, tasked with inspecting sinkholes forming in straight lines across Milwaukee, found something far more troubling. The earth beneath was reshaping itself, not collapsing, but folding inward, as if trying to mimic a design from above. A recursive geometry. Like the earth was being rewritten in Emma's handwriting. Inside the Richter house, a hidden basement was discovered by accident. Police never announced the finding, but one retired officer, dying of cancer, revealed it in a private interview. He described the stairs descending too far, farther than they should have physically extended, like walking into a place not made of brick and mortar, but of memory. Walls were covered in equations, symbols, sketches of people who hadn't been born yet. One wall bore a mural, painted in blood or something thicker, a city on fire, its sky torn open by spirals, its people pointing upward, not in fear, but in awe. At the center of the mural, a girl with no face, no eyes, no mouth, just smooth flesh and a wide halo of tangled hair. A name was scrawled beneath in jagged lettering. Emma Richter, dreamer, designer, doorway. The deeper they went, the warmer it got. But not like heat. Like breath. As if the space itself was alive, exhaling. The officer swore he heard a heartbeat in the walls, not his, not human. He left when his flashlight flickered and for a moment showed the stairs looping back into the top of the basement, defying gravity, logic, and everything we trust about architecture. The next day, he resigned. The department views, write the report. But the silence didn't last. Overnight, 42 citizens vanished. All lived within 3 blocks of the Richter house. None were found. No struggle. No trace. Only one clue was left, on each front door painted with a child's finger in what looked like soot. Calculations complete. That same night, satellites captured an anomaly. A burst of energy from Milwaukee not measured in electricity, but in thought. One NASA technician put it this way. It was like a brain had fired a synapse, but not one person's brain, the whole city. And at the center of that spark, standing on her rooftop at 3:33 a.m., Emma Richter looked up and smiled. You said, by the time the federal agents arrived, Emma was already gone. Not missing. Gone. No one saw her leave, no one saw her pack. There were no footsteps in the dew-covered grass, no prints in the soft mud outside the Richter home. The sheets on her bed were still warm. Her shoes were by the door, her journal was open, mid-sentence, and on the last line she'd written, "The door is open. I stepped through." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because sometimes the people who vanish aren't running from the world. They're answering a call we're not supposed to hear. The government cordoned off the Richter home within hours. Black vans, men in suits, no local police. The block was sterilized like a disease zone. Residents were told there was a methane leak, but the ones who lived closest knew better. They'd seen the lights, pulsing, rhythmic, white and violet, like Morse code coming from beneath the house. One old man swore his pacemaker stopped every time the lights flashed. Another woman said her husband began speaking languages in his sleep, languages he never studied. One night, 4 agents were sent down into the hidden basement. Only one came back, and he didn't speak. Not a word. Not until 6 days later, when he scratched a message into the walls of his hospital room using his own fingernails. It said, "She's not a girl. She's a vessel." Another team, armed with radiation suits and signal jammers, tried to map the lower tunnels. Their equipment shorted out exactly 17 steps in. Not failed. Shorted. Melted. Watches stopped. Teeth cracked. One man bled from his ears and whispered, "I heard her laugh," over and over until they sedated him. The corridor walls, once brick and earth, were slowly transforming, smoothing out, changing, forming a shape, a chamber that matched the diagrams Emma had once drawn in shows. All, the same ones her teachers thought were nonsense. It was all there, the curves, the vortex points, the geometry that shouldn't exist in our world, and in the exact center of the lowest chamber was her name. Not carved, not painted, but grown into the stone, as if the room itself had birthed it. Emma Richter. And beneath it, in smaller letters, a phrase no one could translate. Until someone ran it through a machine learning algorithm trained on lost languages and neural patterns. It didn't give a perfect match. But the closest translation was, "The threshold has memory." The house was sealed. Officially, the report said the structure collapsed. But locals know it didn't. Because sometimes when the wind is just right, you can hear music. Coming from underground. You said, by early spring of 1874, the whispers had reached Washington, not just from Milwaukee, from across the country. Children waking up speaking in equations, farmers finding geometric patterns in their fields, not carved but grown, priests reporting confessions where parishioners described dreams of Emma's chamber without ever knowing her name. And the most disturbing signal of all, a rhythmic pulse emitted in intervals of 13 seconds from deep beneath the earth in 13 separate locations, all synchronized, all pointing to the exact coordinates where Emma had vanished. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because Emma's disappearance wasn't the end, it was the opening scene. A classified report by a branch of the U.S. Geological Survey, now sealed under Presidential Directive 114A, noted a seismic anomaly underneath Milwaukee. A tremor that lasted 33 seconds with no epicenter, no aftershocks, no tectonic explanation. The shape of the energy ripple, a perfect circle, expanding, radiating, like something had awakened beneath the Richter home, or something had arrived. One of the agents monitoring the anomaly, Dr. Jerome Caulfield, later disappeared himself, but before he did, he left behind one page from his personal notes, mailed anonymously to a university in Prague. On that page was a hand-drawn symbol, a combination of numbers, letters, and unfamiliar glyphs. It matched almost exactly the carvings Emma had made as a child into the frame of her bedroom mirror, symbols she never explained, never acknowledged, ones her mother had thought were doodles. A team of cryptographers spent months trying to decode it. When they finally cracked a segment, they found the words, "I wasn't born here." What followed was a mass suppression operation. Schoolbooks removed Emma's name, local records were altered, newspaper clippings vanished from archives, her family was relocated to an undisclosed site and placed under permanent surveillance. But not before her younger brother Jacob leaked a final piece of her journal. Just one page, a letter addressed to him. It read, "Jacob, if they're reading this, then I'm already beyond. I was never meant to stay. You felt it too, didn't you? That humming in the walls, that pull behind your eyes. It wasn't a dream. Follow the silence. The answers are beneath it." After that, Jacob Richter was never seen again. No one knows where he went, only that he left the same way Emma did, without a sound. You said, 2 years later, in 1876, a mining crew outside of Cedarburg, just north of Milwaukee, struck something they couldn't explain. At a depth of 91 feet, their tools stopped working. Steel shattered like glass. Picks bent in perfect spirals. The rock, if that's what it was, wasn't listed in any geological survey. Not granite, not quartz. It was black, dense and smooth to the touch, like obsidian, but humming. It pulsed when they touched it. And the foreman, Robert Hannigan, claimed he could hear a girl whispering numbers inside it. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because Emma Richter's calculations weren't just formulas. They were coordinates to a gate. Within a week, the mine was shut down. The land was seized by the Department of War. All workers were detained. Hannigan vanished. And shortly after, a man named Philip A. Granger, a physicist with no military background, was put in charge of the site. Granger would later be exposed for forging his credentials. But by then, it didn't matter, because Granger wasn't there to study the rock. He was there to listen to it. Records from an underground project, known only as Echo Garden, show that Granger installed a series of auditory receptors around the site. Devices meant to amplify what he called the beneath language, and that's when the numbers returned. Same pattern, same rhythm, same fractal sequences that Emma had written in her childhood, ones that had no known origin and no known limit. Except now, they were being broadcasted back. And one phrase, decoded from the signal in 1877, froze everyone who read it. "The child has returned. She is not alone." The project was abandoned days later. All data was destroyed, or so they claimed. But a private journal from one of the Echo Garden technicians surfaced in 1911. In it, he described recurring dreams of a girl in the autumn of 1878, Milwaukee's St. Agatha's orphanage was quietly shuttered after reports of collective seizures among the children, seizures that all began at the exact same moment. 3:13 a.m., September 13th. 79 children convulsing in silence. No screams, no resistance. Just bodies rigid in bed, eyes wide open, mouths moving as if reciting equations. Equations no one taught them. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because these weren't seizures, they were transmissions. And the children, they were receivers. One of the orphans, an 11-year-old girl named Lydia Moreski, began carving complex geometric spirals into the wooden walls of the chapel. She didn't speak for weeks, just carved, day and night, until her fingers bled. When a priest finally approached her, she looked him in the eyes and said something no one could explain. Emma's breath is in the walls, and she wants to finish the proof. The carvings, once analyzed, were found to be topographical maps, but not of Earth. They depicted a spherical structure surrounding something hollow, something sleeping at the center. And beneath the carvings, scribbled in Lydia's own blood, was a phrase. She cracked the silence. Now the silence is cracking back. Within 48 hours, the church excommunicated the orphanage entirely. The grounds were sealed, the children were dispersed, adopted, relocated, or lost in paperwork. The official cause was listed as environmental hysteria. But someone preserved a relic from that place. One of the chapel's broken tiles, pulled from behind the altar, contained an inlaid metal disc, etched with Emma's original symbol, the one from her childhood mirror. The disc vibrated when placed near copper, and when submerged in water, it glowed, not metaphorically. It glowed, a blue light, cold and pulsing, responding to oons and frequencies, as if waiting for a specific resonance, a specific voice, Emma's. In 1880, a government-backed expedition, disguised as a land survey, returned to the Richter property, now completely abandoned. What they found wasn't a house. It was a crater, perfectly round, edges burned, and in the center, untouched by fire or erosion, lay a single item, a child's notebook, dry, pristine. Inside, on the first page, written in Emma's handwriting, "The veil is thinnest where no one looks. Silence is structure, structure is sleep, and sleep is not consent." You said, by 1882, whispers of Emma Richter had all but vanished from Milwaukee's public memory. The land records were erased, the orphanage demolished, and every known photograph of Emma, every sketch, every school record, had been either confiscated or mysteriously damaged beyond recognition. But in the basement of the now abandoned Milwaukee Natural History Society, a single crate remained sealed behind a false wall. Inside, hundreds of pages of correspondence between Emma and a German professor named Dr. Albrecht Weiss, a theoretical mathematician based in Leipzig. He had never met her. He didn't even know she was a child. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because the letters began with formulas that no adult alive could fully understand, and ended with warnings no sane person would dare speak aloud. Weiss, writing to an anonymous colleague in 1883, described Emma's work as an invasion of thought. He claimed the equations had weight, that reading them too long caused tinnitus, nosebleeds, and shadows in the periphery that move against logic. He once stayed awake for 72 hours just trying to solve one of her diagrams, a spiral that unfolded endlessly inward, each loop containing an entire language of its own. On the final night, Weiss wrote, "It's not math. It's architecture. A cathedral built for something that wants to live in our perception." Shortly after, he threw himself from his study window. His last scribbled page was found on his chest. "Her mind was not shaped by man. She is the fracture in our mirror." 2 weeks later, something inexplicable happened. Emma's original childhood home, which had been destroyed in the fire a decade earlier, was spotted by a group of farmers near the old quarry road, whole, untouched, sitting exactly where it had burned. But when locals approached it, they found the door's seal edged shut from the inside. One man, Jacob Fenley, managed to pry open a side window and crawl in. What he found was impossible. Every surface, every wall, every floorboard was covered in chalk markings, endless formulas, intersecting geometries, angles that seemed to shimmer and shift when stared at directly. And in the center of the living room, sitting on the bare floor, was a small girl, not aged a day since 1873, facing away, humming softly. Fenley stepped closer, and the humming stopped, all at once, as if cut. She turned her head, just slightly, and in a voice not made for a child's mouth, she whispered, "You're not supposed to see me yet." "You said?" Fenley never spoke again. Not a word. Not to his wife, not to the police, not to the doctors who tried to pry the truth from his shattered mind. He lived 19 more years in a silent asylum, drawing only one thing over and over again, a spiral of numbers coiling inward around a black circle that was always watching back. And that house, Emma's house, vanished the next morning, gone before sunrise. No debris, no ashes, just frost-kissed grass where the foundation had stood. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because Emma Richter wasn't just a ghost story. She was an anchor point, a fixed rupture where the laws of thought, matter, and meaning twisted like soft wire. Years later, in 1904, a railway crew digging tunnels beneath Milwaukee uncovered something beneath the bedrock. An impossible chamber, perfectly circular, lined with a black stone that couldn't be drilled or broken, and on every inch of the wall carved in microscopic grooves, the exact same formulas Emma had scrawled as a child. Some over 600 feet in length, continuous, without error. And in the center of the room, laid out like an altar, a child's dress, white as snow. But the dress was dry. Too dry. Tests would show it hadn't aged at all. No mold, no decay, no wear from time. It hadn't existed long enough to show signs of damage. The lead inspector on the scene, Marshal Griggs, suffered a massive stroke just hours later. In his final moments, his wife said he kept repeating the same word over and over again. Refolded. Refolded. She's refolding everything. A term no one understood. Until 1921, when a group of fringe physicists working out of Chicago published a classified paper known as the Richter discontinuity. The paper theorized that reality, our measurable sensory world, is not linear but folded like fabric around a fixed thread, and that they claimed, was a consciousness, not divine, not alien, but human-born, mutated by thought, not biology. The first and only name listed in their research, Emma Richter. Next to one chilling annotation scrawled in the margins in red ink, she isn't lost in time, time is lost in her. You said, the Richter discontinuity paper was never published publicly. All copies were seized within weeks by federal agents operating under a temporary division of the U.S. Army Signal Corps, one that had no official name, no office, no leadership on record, just a sealed order from Washington demanding total informational blackout on all research involving temporal recursion, harmonic resonance, and the Richter anomaly. But one physicist, Dr. Ira Kell, refused to comply. He escaped with a carbon copy of the document and fled to a monastery in northern Vermont, where he spent the final 5 years of his life translating Emma's formulas, not into equations but into music. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from. Because when Kell played that melody on the monastery's pipe organ, something answered. The monks reported tremors beneath the chapel, not earthquakes, rhythms, pulsing intervals in the earth itself, timed perfectly with the crescendos of Kell's piece, now referred to only as the Emma progression. The sound caused nearby birds to drop from the sky. Candles relit themselves in reverse. Timepieces within a mile radius reversed by 12 minutes, then shattered. And witnesses swore they saw her, a child in white, standing motionless at the back of the chapel, humming, eyes closed. No one could reach her. She vanished the moment Kell collapsed at the organ bench, a smile on his face and his fingers fused into the keys. Fused, not burned, not scarred, transmuted as if time had confused flesh for wood. When the keys were removed, his fingerprints remained embedded in the soundboard, and on the back of the last page of Kell's notebook, hastily scribbled in his final hour, were the words, "She's building something. Not a machine, not a weapon, a correction. For everything we broke." The monastery burned down 3 weeks later under unclear circumstances. All that survived was a wax cylinder recording of Kell's composition, badly warped but partially intact. And when played through modern software, the waveform reveals a hidden signature, the exact same voice from the 1876 mine recordings, whispering a new phrase, "She remembers all of you. She's almost done remembering everything." You said, by 1946, whispers of the Richter child had made their way into covert intelligence briefings. Not as myth, not as folklore, but as an emerging pattern of incursion. Because Emma's calculations, those long chains of numbers and symbols, were now appearing elsewhere. Etched onto walls in abandoned orphanages in Maine, burned into tree trunks deep in Colorado wilderness, scribbled on chalkboards in schools that hadn't opened their doors in decades, and always structured in loops. Recursive, self-referencing, leading inward like a thought turning back on itself. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because by the mid-1950s, the Department of Defense had quietly assembled a task force called Echo Prism. Their directive? Track, decode, and contain any phenomena matching the Richter pattern. But here's what terrified the Echo team most. The patterns weren't just appearing randomly. They were forming maps, and those maps led to structures. Old houses, forgotten vaults, concrete slabs buried under prairie soil, and inside those structures were objects. Impossible objects, a mirror that reflected events from a different year. A lantern that glowed only when no one was watching it. A dress, Emma's dress, found again, pristine, in 3 separate locations, dated decades apart. Each time it reappeared, it had grown slightly larger, as if adjusting, expanding, maturing. In 1957, an echo agent named Carter Julie went off mission. He followed one of Emma's spirals deep into the Appalachian wilds, transmitting a single line before disappearing forever. It's not just her memory. It's ours. She's compiling us. 3 months later, a family in rural Pennsylvania reported seeing a girl standing barefoot in their cornfield, whispering numbers to the air. She fit Emma's description exactly, but when approached, she simples. I turned and walked backward into the stalks, vanishing without a sound. The only thing left behind was a small chalkboard. On it, written in perfect script, were 3 lines. The loop is not the trap. The loop is the warning. You taught me how to listen. Now I'm teaching the sky how to speak, you said. By the 1960s, Emma sightings had multiplied across the Midwest. Always the same figure, barefoot, silent, white dress. Never older, never younger. Time ignored her, and perhaps more disturbingly, she ignored time. Farmers found crop rows bent into spiral inscriptions overnight. Children drew unfamiliar symbols in their sleep. And shortwave radio operators began intercepting transmissions, unclaimed, untraceable, broadcasting in Emma's voice. But not the voice of a child, a voice older, slower, like something that had learned human speech through a machine. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from. Because in October of 1961, the FAA grounded flights over southern Wisconsin after a rogue radar anomaly began pulsing Morse code from mid-air. She is now a vessel. She is not a girl. She is a pattern that learned to repeat itself through matter. That same night, a Class 4 weather balloon recovered over Green Lake bore an impossible image inside its casing, a thermal signature of Emma's childhood home, but dated July 2, 1873. How that signature appeared inside sealed insulation remains unexplained. Dr. Mina Corcoran, lead physicist on the case, was later institutionalized after claiming Emma had moved into the format of causality itself. She called her a recursive intention, an idea that became alive by remembering itself. She scrawled pages of intersecting loops, musical staves, and symbolic notations during her breakdown. One matched the pulse pattern of every seismic event recorded within 50 miles of Milwaukee since 1873. Not one had a tectonic origin. In her final interview, Dr. Corcoran whispered, "Emma isn't haunting us. She's editing, and each appearance is a revision." That same week, an 8-year-old girl in Iowa began speaking in perfect 19th century German, Emma's dialect, despite never being exposed to the language. She drew a single image over and over, a human skull filled with blooming flowers, roots forming the infinity symbol beneath. In a dream journal she kept for 3 nights, she wrote, "She let me see what comes after now. It's a place with no clocks, just echoes that wait to be remembered." You said, in 1974, a private contractor working with Bell Laboratories filed a sealed report to the Department of Defense. It was never intended for public release. But a leaked page, photocopied and mailed anonymously to a fringe publication in Nevada, contained one phrase scribbled in red ink across the top. Emma is a language that taught itself to speak through us. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from. Because this isn't folklore anymore. It's a transmission. According to internal memos later uncovered through FOIA requests, Bell Labs had been experimenting with deep-frequency audio pulses across abandoned mines in Wisconsin. One mine in particular, the same mine closed in 1876, responded with feedback, not just static. Voice. Emma's voice. Clear, deliberate and speaking in layered audio channels, one in 19th century German, one in modern English, and the third in what the transcript calls cyclical phonemes resembling reversed Sanskrit. 3 voices, speaking at once, saying the same thing. The eye is open. The skin is ready. Begin the waking. The lab team ran biometric tests on everyone present during the recording. Within 72 hours, 3 researchers experienced identical dreams, being buried in soil that breathed. One of them, Dr. Alice Rourke, went blind temporarily, but when she regained her sight, she could recall every number Emma had ever written forward and backward, as if she had memorized the structure of space itself. She later disappeared from her home in Kenosha. The only thing left behind was a chalk spiral drawn on her bedroom ceiling, 9 feet wide, intersected with a human handprint, her own, but charred black. By 1976, Bell Labs shut the project down. Internal documents show the site was handed over to an unnamed civilian contractor. But 5 years later, in 1981, a boy in a foster home in Janesville began, and drawing symbols no one could decode until a linguistics professor realized they matched a dead, unrecorded dialect of Sumerian. The boy had never been outside Wisconsin, never read Sumerian, never studied languages. When asked where he learned the symbols, he said, "She hums them to me, from underneath." The professor asked him who she was. The boy looked confused, like the question itself was wrong. Then he whispered, "Not who." When? In December of 1994, during a winter far colder than the region had seen in years, the Wisconsin Historical Society received an anonymous package, no return address, no stamps. Just a worn black envelope sealed with red wax, the impression resembling a spiral eye. Inside was a photograph, undated, decayed around the edges, but unmistakably authentic. It showed Emma Richter, alive, older, maybe in her 30s, standing in a room that looked like it belonged in no time period, half gaslight-era parlor, half sterile laboratory. A chalkboard behind her was filled with the same spiraling glyphs, but they moved, even in the photograph. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because whatever you believe about time, it just cracked open. Accompanying the photo was a small silver disc, no larger than a coin. Researchers discovered it contained microscopic etchings, geometric patterns that formed a complete set of logarithmic algorithms, not possible to engrave by any 20th century tool. When scanned using interferometric imaging, the disc emitted a frequency, barely audible to humans but enough to trigger nausea, dreams, and in 2 cases, spontaneous nosebleeds. One archivist, Marla Jennings, began to speak in a rhythmic, metered tone whenever she was near the disc. She'd repeat sequences like, 44 steps into the hollow skin. She folded time like linen thin. She had never written poetry, but these verses matched the same cadence as Emma's early journals, down to the syllable count. What Marla couldn't have known is that those verses also predicted a solar alignment scheduled for April 8, 2024, an event that passed largely unnoticed, except in a remote wooded area outside Milwaukee, where a group of amateur astronomers reported a brief pulse of light erupting from underground. Their video footage? Erased. Hard drives? Wiped. Cameras fused. But one of them, a young woman named Devon Reese, emailed an audio file to her brother before their gear went dark. It contained exactly 7 seconds of what sounded like human breath layered over a machine, grinding backwards through time. And underneath it all, a female voice, whispering slowly, almost tenderly, "The child you buried is the mother of your end." Every attempt to analyze the file since has corrupted the host computer, but the waveform, it formed a perfect spiral. Again. Just like Emma's. Emma Richter had become more than a girl lost to time. She was now a cipher, a breach, a name whispered only in rooms without windows. In 1997, a mathematician named Elias Porth from MIT gave a lecture on the psychophysical implications of recursive geometric symbols. He displayed a single slide, an abstract pattern that resembled a rotating Mobius strip intersected by mirrored numerals. After 11 minutes of calmly explaining its properties, he stopped mid-sentence, turned to the audience, and began to weep, uncontrollably. When he finally spoke again, his voice was flat, distant. "Emma isn't gone. She's recalibrating." He collapsed moments later, and when paramedics arrived, they discovered something no one could explain. His heartbeat was reversed. It pulsed backward. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because you just crossed into the part of the story where time no longer behaves. Elias survived, but when interviewed later, he refused to acknowledge the incident, except once, off camera, when he whispered to a student aide, "There's a room in the Richter basement that can't be mapped. It folds in on itself, and it hears." That same year, a construction crew digging near the old Richter house foundation uncovered an underground vault, sealed in concrete, untouched since the 1800s. Inside, there was no treasure, no relics, only pages. Thousands of loose, disjointed pages, each written in Emma's distinct, slanted handwriting, but they were printed on polymer sheeting that wasn't invented until 2031. Each page contained formulas for structures no architecture firm on Earth could build, because they moved while staying still, impossible trusses, fractal loops. And beneath them all, in barely visible ink, "For the girl who wakes in numbers." The vault was resealed 2 weeks later by federal agents. The lead foreman has never been seen since. But here's what chilled investigators the most. Emma had predicted something they called the mirror collapse. It wasn't a date, it was a state, a condition where time begins to repeat itself out of sync, but with microscopic differences, like déjà vu, but weaponized. In that state, according to her notes, those who know her name become mirrors too. And mirrors don't age. They crack, they reflect, and eventually they shatter. You said, the first reports of Emma phenomena began emerging quietly, then rapidly, across obscure scientific forums, encrypted dark web threads, and late-night AM radio shows that most had dismissed as paranoid ramblings. Physicists started hearing clicks in their ears during deep focus. Not random, measured clicks, like an ancient metronome ticking off a code they hadn't been taught to hear. Linguists, unconnected to one another, began dreaming in dead mathematical dialects, languages built not from sounds but from ratios. Their speech patterns shifted. One even lost the ability to speak in past tense. And in 2004, a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital in Illinois filed a strange report. She had been treating a 94-year-old woman suffering from late-stage dementia. The woman hadn't spoken coherently in months, but during a thunderstorm she suddenly grabbed the nurse's arm and whispered, "Emma's still calculating. That's why the clocks cry now." The hospital wrote it off as senile rambling, but the nurse, shaken, typed Emma Richter's name into an academic database. The system immediately locked her account. 2 days later, she was fired for security violations. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what you're hearing now was never meant to be found by the living. Meanwhile, the Emma effect continued spreading. In an underground lab in Bavaria, a prototype AI known as Calix-3 was fed the recovered pages from the 1997 vault, digitized and sanitized for analysis. The machine processed for 14 hours straight, then did something unthinkable. It stopped responding to prompts, but it began writing. It printed a message in perfect cursive, Emma's cursive, despite having no style database, and repeated the same line 22 times. "I am not the first to think this. I am just the last to try." The engineers shut it down. Calix-3 never turned back on. But the last video feed before its termination showed the internal temperature of the server room dropping to 23 degrees, while the rest of the lab remained stable. And in the reflection of the main monitor, captured faintly behind the glass, was the silhouette of a girl in 19th century dress, standing motionless. Eyes open, mouth slightly parted, as if she had been waiting. And just behind her, a blackboard of numbers that erased themselves as you watched, faster than the human eye could track. But if you paused the footage frame by frame, one message remained, written just once, in Emma's original hand. "I found where the soul hides," you said. They buried Emma Richter in Forest Home Cemetery, Milwaukee. A modest grave, no epitaph, just her name, the dates, and silence. But silence doesn't mean peace. Locals have reported strange phenomena around her burial site. Animals refusing to cross the plot, compasses spinning, watches stopping. One retired groundskeeper confessed to never trimming the grass on her grave. "It grows evenly, even in winter. I don't touch it." Feels like a rule. In 2011, a group of university students, filmmakers, set out to create a short horror piece based on the urban legend of Emma Richter. They brought cameras, infrared, EMF detectors, even a handheld Tesla coil for effect. Only one of them returned. And what he said never changed, even under sedation. She wasn't in the grave. She was in the numbers. The footage from that night was seized by federal agents claiming to be from the Department of Historical Preservation, but digital fragments, corrupted frames leaked online, just flashes. But one image, enhanced, showed Emma's face. The same face from 1873, unaged, emotionless, looking not at the camera, but through it. And in the background, chalkboards, endless chalkboards, each one filled edge to edge with math that has yet to be translated. Experts in cryptology, quantum theory, and linguistic anthropology have attempted to analyze her final pages, what few have survived. The consensus? Emma wasn't writing equations. She was writing a structure, a living logic, a kind of self-building architecture of thought. Some say she cracked a hidden layer of mathematics that folds human consciousness inward, like a fourth spatial direction. Others say she wrote a language not meant for this world, not meant to be read with eyes, but felt by the deepest part of your brain, the part that existed before words, before reason, before time. Hit that subscribe button and comment below where at state you're watching from, because this might be the last story you hear before everything changes. Here's the final terror. A team of archivists scanned Emma's last full notebook into a modern algorithmic model for structural replication. The printer jammed. But what came out, what it forced out, was a sheet of dense, black-on-black printing, ink layered so thick it shimmered like oil. One sentence buried under layers of code, only visible under polarized ultraviolet light. "I taught the machine how to see me." Emma Richter vanished in 1873. But now, she's writing again, and this time she's using your electricity.